Welcome to the Titration video series. Today we're going to talk about agent operations. I'm Remi and I'm assisted by Rob.
Hello, Remi.
Hey, Rob. So today we're going to look into how we can actually get someone to make this thing work.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I think that the agents are a critical part to our success with Titration, and we definitely want to make sure that those agents are operating well. They're doing exactly what we're expecting of them. So let's take a look at what happens really once we've deployed and got them configured. How do we operate them?
Sounds good. So I'm here on our same cluster that we've had along all those video series. Where should I start? I guess first thing we want to know is that which agents are there. I think that's probably a pretty good start, right?
Exactly.
So as you want to check which agents are reporting, which versions they're running, what OS they're going, you can actually go to monitoring and agents. One thing you'll notice before I click there, the agent has a little bit of a key next to it. The key means that you need to have a privileged access to access the agent page. So as a normal user, you will not see this page.
You're no normal user, Remi. That is
I am
without
no
a doubt.
Exactly. I am the perfect user of this platform, right? So that's what you get. Rob, seems to make sense to you?
It does. And we've talked in the agent overview module about the different types of agents, and right here we can see them displayed for us. So what have we actually got deployed?
Well, I can see, if I just read 31 enforcement, 0 visibility, 0 universal, 0 AnyConnect, 0 eyes, 0 hardware switches, 0 span agents.
We've got some work to do, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty lightweight, right?
You did read that right, and so clearly our focus here is all about getting the policy delivered all the way through to enforcement. But certainly in a lot of environments we would have a combination of different agent types to meet different requirements.
Sounds good. Already, first glance at that, do you think anything is wrong?
It looks pretty good. We've got green ticks and we've got a number of enforcement agents deployed. I think on the surface at least, we're off to the races.
Perfect. So the things you should focus on if you connect to this page and you want to know the overall health of your systems, number of agents deployed is pretty useful for stats purposes. But what you're really looking at, inactive, upgrade failed, or policy out of sync. Those are the 3 categories that you really want to focus in. You have the same for visibility with the exception of policy. There's no policy there. So if all of those are 0 already, pretty good start. Everything is working as expected. I think we can get a bit more details. I don't know if those are Windows or Linux.
Yeah, I guess it's completely unknown to us, right? We know that whatever is deployed there is operating pretty well. They are checking in. Their policies are in sync with whatever we've actually determined is the policy to deploy there. So let's maybe dig into the next level.
Okay, let's see. So if I click on the enforcement agent, I'm going to have a different graph here. So obviously here, everything seems...
It's all green again.
Perfect, I like it.
This is pretty good.
You want to wake up to that every morning, right?
Yep.
So
but maybe before you get into, so if it wasn't all green or it wasn't all 100% active, what would we actually see here?
Like here, you would see the top left part would actually show you, I don't know, it's the pie chart, sorry.
Yes.
I was thinking the cheese diagram, because in French we call it camembert, the diagram, yes. So you would have this pie chart, and you would have a chunk of the pie chart which would become red or orange if it's intermittent, so that would show here.
Okay.
Thankfully, everything is fine. You would have, if upgrade was failing, you would have the upgrade failed that would actually go up. The upgrade pending would show if you were just after an upgrade, for example. I remember in a different module you were explaining that when you upgrade, they upgrade in batches, so that you could have pending for a bit.
Yep.
So that's really the thing that you should be looking at there. Now, usually the second part you want to look at is which team you should engage, because obviously if a sensor is not responding, you're not going to call the Windows guys for a Linux problem. I think the Windows guys might not find that funny.
I'm pretty sure they won't take
at
that
3 a.m. especially. So as you scroll down, this page is actually going to give you a breakdown of the deployment of sensors across the environment. So that's per version. Remember, we said in the video series regarding the sensors, try to stick with n-1 and then a version number. So whatever is the support version -1 would be the recommendation of us. But there might be reasons why there could be a mix. And if there is a mix, you'll see this mix show up here in terms of list of different versions of the agents.
So I notice here in the agent version distribution, we've actually got both types are actually 3322.
Yeah.
What's the differentiation there?
You notice one has .win64.
Okay.
The Win64 agent is actually the agent for Windows.
Got it.
So as you can go here, if you really want to see the details, you could click, and that would show you exactly the piece of the pie chart we're talking about.
Okay.
And if you want to see more details, you could just click here, and that would show you exactly which sensor we're talking about.
Excellent. So I noticed there that not only did you have the ability to go in and filter those, but even before that it showed you not only the percentage, but exactly how many agents were in that particular slice of the overall pie chart.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know.
I think that's it's a pretty nice. Obviously, Chrome is never happy with me when it comes to go back. Here we go. Coming back here. Back here. That I've seen lots of customers use this view in management dashboard. Mm-hmm. What's your progress on deployment of agents? Well, that's the progress on deployment of agents. We've covered OS here with this version running, etc., etc. It's pretty useful at this point. But there, seems all good to me. You see anything wrong here?
No, we've got a pretty good spread of operating systems, probably majority looking like CentOS, a little bit of Windows, some Ubuntu in there as well. I think, based on the overall health, it's looking pretty good.
Okay, perfect. So let's have a bit of a look. So now we are at our enforcement agents. We looked at it. I mean, agents seem healthy. Everything seems okay there. And next thing that we want to check is the enforcement status. Are the agents enforcing as they're expected to be enforcing? Mm-hmm. Let's have a look. And we have some interesting output here, because you will actually see that some agents are enabled for enforcement while others are not. And that's something which I personally think is useful as you're going through that process. The reason for that is that in a previous series, we talked about how to use the config intent. Let's say that you mistype your filters. Those things may happen, like you mistype a digit or you don't type correctly the name of the tag you're matching. Mm-hmm. You might have enabled your enforcement on a small portion of the environment.
So you think you're enforcing on workloads that are actually not being enforced at all?
Exactly.
Okay.
That doesn't sound good to me.
We don't really want to be there.
No. Right. And there, someone else will fall on you. It will be Rob. Mm-hmm. Why are my agents not enforcing? Yeah. And you're going to say, oh, because I fat fingered one tag. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it's going to play really well with the boss. No. So the feedback here is the first part is going to be on the left side is, okay, well, I have 13 agents which are enabled for enforcement, but I have 18 which are not even enabled. Might be normal, maybe it's intentional, maybe not.
Yep. Certainly worth looking into, right?
Absolutely.
If it's an unexpected result, we'll want to drill down into that and find out more.
And drilling down is always super easy. I mean, it's just a question. You click and you can see that the bottom of the page, let me do it again so you can see, up. You can see the bottom of the page will actually update based on what you've selected on the pie chart. So here are my 18 agents which are not enabled for enforcement.
Okay.
Pretty simple there. If you were to have an agent that did not enforce at all, they would also show up here, but they would show up in red.
Okay.
If they show up in red, you can always click on an agent to get a bit more detail. So don't forget to click there, because the actual status will actually give the error message.
And that's a pretty common thing in a lot of the UI screens. We'll have a lot of line entries. Always click the line for that next level of detail.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, we have quite a few times where customer call in and it's like, oh, agent doesn't work. And like they're stuck themselves. I mean, it's not like they're stuck, they cannot move forward. And then we come in and say, oh, did you click here? Oh, I didn't know I could click. So you can click. And that would probably tell you, for example, one of the very common one on Windows, your GPU is actually blocking the policies. That happens quite a bit there. Mm-hmm. You will see a very clear message here. saying why it doesn't work.
Okay.
So go here, that's your go-to place there, and as usual, green is good.
Yeah, so maybe while we're here, could you explain concrete policies?
Very good points. Remember we played around with ADM and stuff like that in other series. Some things we've seen in ADM is that we define always what we call an intent. We define what we were expecting this policy to do. But we didn't actually tell the policy to render. And there's a difference between the intent and the rendering. When you render a policy, the policy is transformed from an intent, which is something which is high level, to a concrete policy.
Okay.
And the concrete policy is going to have those IP address may talk to those IP address over this port, this protocol. That's a concrete policy.
Right, and that will effectively be the merged set of policy that Tetration has defined based on the hierarchy and the different policies that are actually being enforced across the workloads.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So as long as they're generated, you're good.
Excellent.
If they're skipped, you might need to check in a little bit further. If they're skipped, most likely there'll be an error message as well further down
Okay.
to explain why.
Great. So what if we wanted to get the next level of detail? So we've clicked the line, we've sort of seen the details for this particular workload. What else can we actually understand from the actual workload's perspective? Can we actually see more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to see is that what's actually enabled on that workload.
Yeah.
It says disabled. Let's see why.
Yep.
So I can go and I can click here on the IP address, and that would bring me to something called the workload profile. There's multiple ways you can get the workload profile. So as you saw, I clicked on the IP address. It brings me back to workload profile. You can also go here to inventory search. So if you go to inventory search here, you can have the exact same result. This view will show me the overall view of the workload, which down to traffic volume, amounts of packets, everything you want is going to show up inside this view. So first thing we want to know is what's actually applied on this workload. So let's go to config. And config, unlike when we were talking about the config intent, this is actually the config which is enabled and applied to this workload.
Right. So even if maybe we misordered the actual configuration intents, this is going to tell us what's the actual status,
Exactly.
the state on that machine. Yep.
And what can you see from this state?
Enforcement disabled.
Okay, that seems to explain why it's not working. Why is it not enabled? My guess is that we didn't create a filter that encompasses this workload.
Yes.
So that's most likely our problem here. There's actually quite a few other things we can look at in this case. So, for example, what are the stats of that agent? So let's go and click the stats. What can you see, Rob?
Well, I remember when we looked at the configuration intents, we had various caps or quotas we could configure for overheads, and this now gives us the ability to actually have a look at the actual results on those. So we're monitoring the agents, we're seeing the CPU and the bandwidth overheads in, I guess, historical terms for the agent.
Which is really nice, because
yeah.
obviously if I wanted to see that, I would need to SSH to the machine and go and see the details, which we'd rather avoid people doing, right?
Yep.
So you will see as well the bandwidth overhead. Any idea why the bandwidth overhead is so big, Rob?
Well, I would say it's proportionate to the actual activity of the workload, maybe, Remi.
You think we're not using it a lot?
I'm expecting that the real world usage of this particular machine is not a great amount, but we're still having to actually stream telemetry back for that very low amount of bandwidth.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, because most likely this machine is listening to NTP and doing a few DNS call and maybe getting an update here and there, but that's about it. Yeah. So yeah.
So Remi, what would we expect in a real world scenario with a sort of typical application machine in a data center?
In a typical machine, typical environment, we see sub 1% is what we see.
Okay.
That's the kind of normal value we see there. It may spike up to 2%, but the norm is more 1 and below 1.
Yeah, that's certainly what I've seen. And on the CPU side of things?
That's a pretty right number. I mean, it's I've never seen it cross 1% yet.
Yep.
So I don't know if you have seen that.
Yeah, no, certainly in the sort of below 0.5%, like the low teens.
So that's pretty nice. And obviously, how many flows have we been exploiting?
Okay. So this is effectively that configuration setting, data plane enabled, means that the agent is streaming telemetry, the flow information is coming back. This is counting how many of those flows are actually being received. Missed packets.
Missed
That's
packets.
an interesting one. And clearly we're on zeros. There are no missed packets right now. When would we actually potentially see missed packets?
So that's actually one thing that you should monitor. It could be useful to monitor this. Missed packets are if you hit the CPU boundary.
Okay.
So if you send too much data onto that VM, you set a limit, which is, for example, 3%. In this sensor, it's 3%. If I was to max out those 3%, I would actually see a number of missed packets going up. So that's an indication that the CPU limit I've set is actually too low for that workload.
Okay.
Might be okay. I mean, you might decide, could be a spike once and just lose a few packets because you might be under DDoS, for example. But if this is a DB server, for example, and it's like that all the time, well, most likely you need to tweak your CPU usage.
Okay, that makes sense.
So those are the 4 key graphs to look at. So CPU overhead, bandwidth overhead. This one, bandwidth, I think is a bit less important. CPU for me is pretty important, and missed packet stays to 0.
Yeah,
That's for me.
I think probably just the important thing in terms of bandwidth overhead, it's as a percentage of the actual bandwidth being transmitted and received by the server.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's an important clarification.
So the busier the server, effectively the lower, or typically the lower the overhead rate will be for the telemetry stream.
Yeah, to your point, that's not 25% of 1 gig or 10 gig, right? That would be somewhat a problem.
Yeah.
So that gives us a pretty good view on the agent. Everything looks okay in this case. There we understand why the bandwidth overhead is high.
Yep.
Now, enforcement. Policies being enforced on this workload. So, let me rephrase. Policy that should be enforced on this workload. Because this one, as we saw, enforcement is disabled.
Okay.
So we generated the policies for this workload. These are the policies, but we didn't push them to the host.
Okay.
And that's the enforcement off flag.
Right. So there is still a concrete set of policies ready to go.
Yeah.
Should enforcement be enabled? And if it is, then we'll push it down.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's pretty easy. On that, you'll see the list of policies, which, as you've seen in the enforcement module, mirror the IP tables output of the workload. So if you look at that, and you don't have any access to the workload, which happens quite a bit, in there, you get the direct feedback on what's going on. Then, same thing applies for containers. Should you have any containers? We don't have any containers here, so problem solved. But if you had containers running on top of that host, you could see the container policies applied to it here.
Okay.
Those are the key points I would look at from a central console point of view. Do you see anything else we should cover on that point?
Well, one other thing, maybe just back to the summary. So we've talked about the inventory we build out and the agents there. I noticed there were things like annotations, scopes, other attributes relating to the workloads, and obviously that's part of the agent's identity or this particular inventory item. Maybe just quickly touch on those.
Good point, Rob, actually. We didn't talk about that. We talked about how to see that the agent is working okay. We didn't talk about how to see that it's actually going the right scope or has the right tags. So you saw clearly that you can see in which scopes the server is part of. So you can see that the server is part of Cloud, of Inside, and of Acme in there. The Inside and Acme are transitive. So they're there because you're part of Cloud, Cloud is part of Inside is part of Acme. Yep. So if you were to apply a policy, it will apply across those ones.
Got it.
And then the tags. Tags is pretty nice as well because that tells you which tags have been applied to this specific workloads. So here, say you upload a set of tags, you connect to an external orchestrator, and you want to know, are my tags getting ingested right? Well, that's where you go.
And that would be the full merged set of all annotations for this particular workload. Yep.
I believe in the video where you were talking through inventory and so on, aren't the Acme and Cloud part of the CSV inventory you pushed in?
These were part of the CSV inventory, but if we also had VM tags or other attributes coming in, they would also be brought in here, right, to have the complete picture.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So easy, one place to go. Sounds good, Rob?
That sounds great.
Okay.
So I see a couple of other things here. So we see the actual timelines, the deployment dates, but also check-in. So tell me about how the agents check in and how we actually use that. Because I guess going back to their monitoring, we kind of had, everything was green because the agents were checking in. What's that process and how does it come about that an agent may fail that?
Yeah, good points. And that's actually a great transition to bring us as well to see a little bit how the agent operates on the system. The check-in process, so we call check-in the control channel of the agent. So if you remember the agent modules, there is a control channel and there is a data channel and there's an enforcement channel. So there's 3 channels total. A sensor will report its status every 15 minutes. It will connect back up to the cluster. It will say, hey, I'm here. This is my config. I'm doing okay, kind of thing. There. That's what it does. There. That's what we use for liveliness of the system. This is independent of the policy enforcement. Just want to make that clear. Policy enforcement is a different channel. So if we push our policy, we get a feedback immediately if it works or not. But if you are actually just having visibility, for example, it will check every 15 minutes. Is it okay?
Yep.
And yeah, it seems okay. That actually runs on top of the workload. So for example, here, if I get my focus right, it might be a bit better. If I connect to one of our workloads, so many jump servers. And obviously I need to go as root because I just don't want to go around. If you go to // local tet, you will see that's the installation folder of Tetration. There's a set of files. Check conf update is actually the one that drives all the check-in.
Okay.
So you don't need to worry about that. That's completely automated. So the script will run, it will check in, it will give you feedback on that. If the check-in was to fail, you can go to the log folder and you will find the logs of the conf update that happened in there.
Okay.
So if I want to know, okay, what's going on, I can view the content of the check conf update. And you can see that it's been running on a regular interval and that there's no new sensor that's available for it.
Yep.
So that's one of the log files that you should be aware of in there. I doubt you'll ever have to go to there, honestly. I mean, that we see really rarely. When would you go there? We've seen some cases with some customer where they actually have systems that redirect the traffic through an IPS and then try to terminate the SSL connection. As we saw in the sensor, we do not support SSL interception. If that happens, that's actually a great place to see what's going wrong.
Yep.
Because in that list, you will see all the connection that's going in and you will see the certificate that's responding. If your sensor is checking in correctly, the responding certificate should be issued by customer CA Tetration Analytics. If the certificate is not issued by that, it's issued by your organization, for example, you're most likely intercepting.
Okay.
So that's one log file. This one, I think, solves about 95% of the problems of the agent.
Yeah, so that's really the foundational, is it alive, is it checking in? And that's everything from the first deployment through to subsequent operations, if it suddenly stopped working, right?
Yeah.
Because there was some failure, it could no longer check in, that's the place to go.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you can see it's fairly verbose. I mean, you can look through, you can see exactly what's going on there. So this shouldn't be a major surprise.
Okay.
Now in the other log files, because obviously things will go bad someday, they always do, we work in IT, right? So when that happens, what should you look at? So one, check the UI. If the UI has an explanation for you, it's actually going to be much simpler than to get the access there. If it doesn't, the logs which are critical are the TET enforcer log and the TET sensor log. Those are the 2 logs you should worry about. TET enforcer will explain any failure of enforcement on the system. And if you do, it basically tells you, oh, we're receiving messages and so on, but nothing is happening on the system.
Yep.
So that's fine, normal. Any kind of weird errors you would see there would be usually linked to a clock skew, like that happens more often than you would think. Yep. But if you have a problem, so we use certificates everywhere, of course. If the clock is wrong on the sensor side, you will end up in a situation where, well, the clock may actually be before we actually issued the cert. When that happens, it can't work.
Okay.
So those are the things you should be looking at.
Yep.
The error is pretty clear when that happens. For example, certificate is not yet valid. That's classic clock skew problem.
Check the clock.
Check the clock.
Set the time.
Our certificate is expired. Same thing. Most likely clock skew in those cases. And then the other one is the TED sensor. TED sensor does not have a whole lot of data in it. It's good to troubleshoot data channel. So you see connected to would be the server to which it's trying to connect. If the connection fails, you see a message here about that. So those are your 3 log files that you should be worried about. Chef conf update, TED sensor, TED enforcer.
Okay.
If you have those 3.
Very straightforward.
Another one that you might be interested in, so you can get that from the UI, but sometimes some people go and push their automation pretty far, and they're asking, okay, how can I correlate a machine to a sensor ID integration? And I don't trust host names. Some customers don't rely on host names, which is not necessarily bad. You have a file here. This is called TED sensor ID. If I add the ID, it's better. The sensor ID here is the actual sensor ID as seen by titration. So any API request, any changes you want to do, any correlation you want to do based on API, that's the ID that you're looking for. So remember Ansible, you can do Ansible and pick up this, correlate that titration.
Okay.
How does that look, Rob?
It's pretty good. I think we've covered the key components so that probably day to day would be key, right? So with the health of my agents, understanding the appropriate log files or places to go if we actually wanted to do any troubleshooting of any particular issues. But like you say, I think most things, at least that overall health, the monitoring of the workload fleet can be done directly through the UI.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say maybe just one thing on that. Should you need to open attack case, things might happen, and you have a sensor problem regarding that, we found that the best way to do that is just to tar the TED folder and just attach the TED folder to the case.
Yep.
That's the simplest way to get through. So I think if you want to gain some time, avoid one extra kind of back and forth. That's probably a good way to do it.
Okay.
Anything else, Rob?
No, I think that covers it. We've sort of been through the overall monitoring page. We've been through the workload profile with the details per agent, and now we've kind of stepped into that last piece, which is direct to the workload. So I think in terms of overall monitoring, health, etc., we've probably covered the key aspects there, Remi.
I think we've done a good job on the reactive monitoring. We didn't talk yet about the alerting.
This is a good point.
So everything we've been showing here is, okay, you want to go and check the health, but actually titration can push the health to you. We all like to be sitting in our sofa and just get an alert if something goes bad.
Yep.
Hopefully we'll never get an alert. So let's go back into the UI. So if you did have problems with the system, titration is an alerting framework. We'll cover all that alerting in a separate video on this topic. But the key point of this is that there's 2 kinds of alerts that you want to keep in mind if there is a problem with the sensors. Guess which one? Sensor.
Sensor alerts, that makes sense?
That makes sense.
Yep.
And enforcement.
Okay.
Sensors will get you alerted for any event type. Sensor is not checking in anymore. Sensors unresponsive. That kind of stuff would come through sensors. Anything that's related to enforcement not working would go through the enforcement alerts.
Okay, so that's really interesting because that is another one of those fairly common questions. So if I'm enforcing my workload, what happens if there was any event that maybe a malicious user, an attacker, tried to tamper with the firewall rules?
Oh, okay, I see. You're thinking, what happens if someone flushes the rules, for example?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do we detect that sort of activity?
That's a very good point. So in case of tampering with the rules, if I run iptables -f, you will have an alert that will come in through enforcement. And this alert would say someone has tried to tamper with the firewall, but will revert the rules immediately.
Okay, so there's a set of controls running inside the workload to maintain control over the rule set that's applied.
Yes.
And to be able to alert if there's any change to that.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
ability to effectively enforce the given rule set.
In the agent security module, you'll see that you can actually revert automatically the rules, like in that sub-seconds that happens. So it's like, literally you come in, you type the command iptables-f, and by the time you type the command a second time, well, the rules are there again.
Okay.
And that throws an alert as well.
Yep.
If someone did manage to actually stop you completely from changing the updates, that's when you would actually see it in the the enforcement status.
Got it.
I think we have everything now. I can sit in my sofa and set my alerts out through PagerDuty. I'm happy with that. I get my alerts back. I've got some log files if needed there. I can do about everything through the UI, so I think that's fine.
I think we're in great shape.
Awesome. So you've seen in this video how we managed to handle and to get deeper into the operation of the software sensor. If you want to get more information on this module, you can go to cisco.com/go/titration. Thank you.